The Microsoft MD-102 exam is a critical step towards becoming a modern desktop administrator, and using Cert Queen's exam material is the best way to prepare for it. The exam material is comprehensive, up-to-date, and designed to help candidates understand the exam topics thoroughly. Share some Microsoft MD-102 exam dumps here. 1. You have a Microsoft 365 subscription that contains 100 devices enrolled in Microsoft Intune. You need to review the startup processes and how often each device restarts. What should you use? A. Endpoint Analytics. B. Intune Data Warehouse. C. Azure Monitor. D. Device Management. 2. You have a Microsoft 365 E5 subscription that contains 100 Windows 10 devices enrolled in Microsoft Intune. You plan to use Endpoint Analytics. You need to create baseline metrics. What should you do first? A. Create an Azure Monitor workbook. B. Onboard 10 devices to Endpoint Analytics. C. Create a log analytics workspace. D. Modify the baseline regression threshold. 3. You have a Microsoft 365 E5 subscription that contains 1,000 Windows 11 devices. All the devices are enrolled in Microsoft Intune. You plan to integrate Intune with Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. You need to establish a service-to-service connection between Intune and Defender for Endpoint. Which settings should you configure in the Microsoft Endpoint Manager Admin Center? A. Connectors and tokens. B. Premium add-ons. C. Microsoft Tunnel Gateway. D. Tenant enrollment. 4. You have a Microsoft 365 E5 subscription that contains 100 iOS devices enrolled in Microsoft Intune. You need to ensure that notifications of iOS updates are deferred for 30 days after the updates are released. What should you create? A. A device configuration profile based on the device features template. B. A device configuration profile based on the device restrictions template. C. An update policy for iOS, iPad OS. D. An iOS app provisioning profile. 5. You have a Microsoft 365 E5 subscription that contains a group named Group 1. You create a conditional access policy named CA Policy 1 and assign CA Policy 1 to Group 1. You need to configure CA Policy 1 to require the members of Group 1 to re-authenticate every 8 hours when they connect to Microsoft Exchange Online. What should you configure? A. Session access controls. B. An assignment that uses a user risk condition. C. An assignment that uses a sign-in risk condition. D. Grant access controls. 6. You use Microsoft Intune and Intune Data Warehouse. You need to create a device inventory report that includes the data stored in the data warehouse. What should you use to create the report? A. The Azure Portal app. B. Endpoint Analytics. C. The Company Portal app. D. Microsoft Power BL. 7. You have a Microsoft 365 E5 subscription that contains 500 macOS devices enrolled in Microsoft Intune. You need to ensure that you can apply Microsoft Defender for Endpoint antivirus policies to the macOS devices. The solution must minimize administrative effort. What should you do? A. From the Microsoft Endpoint Manager Admin Center, create a configuration profile. B. From the Microsoft Endpoint Manager Admin Center, create a security baseline. C. Onboard the macOS devices to the Microsoft 365 Compliance Center. D. Install Defender for Endpoint on the macOS devices. 8. You have an on-premises server named Server that hosts a Microsoft Deployment Toolkit (MDT) deployment share named MD-100. You need to ensure that MD-100 supports multicast deployments. What should you install on Server 1? A. Multipath I/O (MPIO). B. Multipoint Connector. C. Windows Deployment Services (WDS). D. Windows Server Update Services (WSUS). 9. You have a Microsoft Deployment Toolkit (MDT) deployment share named DS1. In the out-of-box drivers node, you create folders that contain drivers for different hardware models. You need to configure the Inject Drivers MDT task to use PNP detection to install the drivers for one of the hardware models. What should you do first? A. Import an OS package. B. Create a selection profile. C. Add a gather task to the task sequence. D. Add a validate task to the task sequence. 10. You have a Microsoft 365 subscription that uses Microsoft Intune Suite. You use Microsoft Intune to manage devices. You use Windows Autopilot to deploy Windows 11 to devices. A support engineer reports that when a deployment fails, they cannot collect deployment logs from failed device. You need to ensure that when a deployment fails, the deployment logs can be collected. What should you configure? A. The automatic enrollment settings. B. The Windows Autopilot deployment profile. C. The enrollment status page, especially profile. D. The device configuration profile.